Hi guys, this is Mike. In this Cinema 4D tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a tech city out of MoGraph. First, open to a new document and then go to Splines. Now, the way I'm going to set this up is that each building is going to be made from a rectangle spline. So grab a rectangle spline and we're going to change the plane to ZX plane or XZ plane. Next, I want to change the width size and height size. I like to use a cube as a reference, just in terms of how large things are going to be. So the size of a cube is 200 by 200 by 200. So I'm going to do something similar with that with the rectangle spline. I'm going to go 200 by 200. And you can put a rounding. I like putting a rounding. Let me hide the cube. And that just gives it a smoother corners. So in terms of how round or how crisp you want the corners is really your judgment. I think something like 10 might be fine. So next I want to put the rectangle into a extrude object. So just going to grab the extrude and make the rectangle a child of the extrude. Now if you click on extrude, you're going to see the movement, how much of it extrudes is in the wrong position. So I'm going to change the Z to 0, and I'm going to make the the Y doesn't have to be 20, but I think that'll be fine. And in terms of caps, I also like sort of a smooth edge, but we're gonna go 5 steps and 1 in radius. And we'll do the same thing for the end. 5 steps, 1 in radius. And again, that's also personal preference. Next, I want to bring in a MoGraph cloner object. So go to MoGraph cloner, and we're going to drag the extrude underneath as a child of the cloner. And let's zoom out a bit. I want to add in some more clones. And I also want to go to the endpoint. So at this point, it doesn't move up any further in height as you increase the count. So it just sort of fills in that amount. Next, what I want to do is I want to copy the extrude. So command drag. So now we'll have two shapes. We'll have two shapes extruded within the cloner. Except I want to make the one rectangle smaller than the original one that we had. So I'm just going to rename this small, SM. And with your arrow key, press down until you get to your original extrude, and we'll just make this large, or LG. So clicking on our small rectangle, I'm going to F2 on the keyboard, and I'm going to press T on our keyboard, and it'll bring up transform. I'm just going to resize this slightly. So go to our perspective mode. You can see that the cloner alternates in between each extrusion or each object that we have. Now you can see that through the clones where it says iterate. You can also go random, blend, which blends the shape from, just as long as they're very similar shapes, will blend the shape from one to another. And you can see in this case we have a small one, which is indicated in the list of how it's put in to the cloner object. So whatever is first, in this case, the small object, the small rectangle, and then the second one, it will go in between to the large one. So that's why we have this blending. And then we have sort, which is more for, I found, for color. And we won't get into that exactly into this tutorial. Right now we're just working with iterate in shape. That way it goes alternate. Now what you can also do is add in yet another copy of the large, and let's make sure this is in the clone. Okay, 1 second. And now what's happening is having this double is giving you a little bit of extra space, or it's giving you a more of a thicker space between the smaller ones. And if I go back to the cloner object, I can maybe tighten this up a little bit. You can see we have some space, and you can do that by tightening up in the Y how much this increases in the Y-axis. So that's a little bit better. Now, this is our little building, but we may want to make it a little larger. We may want to make it smaller, but this is something that we can adjust all through just clones. Now, what you can also do is, if you want to give this a roof, an interesting roof, what you can also do is you can grab the large extrude object, command drag, and we'll move outside of our clone. And we're just going to drag this upward to where, when we're at the top. And we can make this editable. And you can click on C on your keyboard, or you can click this button here to make it editable. Now, please be careful. You also have these caps, which aren't connected from our original object. So what you can do is you can select all, and make sure you have everything selected, and you'll go to right click and then connect objects plus delete, and that will delete all the copies that you made. And let's also delete these selection tags since we don't really need them. Okay, so now if you go to NB on your keyboard and you zoom in a little bit, let's go to point mode. I'm going to select a few of these points, and I'm going to drag them up just slightly. Now you'll notice that there's a gap here. Let me move back a little bit. And so these aren't actually connected to our, the caps aren't exactly connected to these edges here. So I'm going to undo. And a way to fix that is to select all, and we'll go to MoGraph. I'm sorry, not MoGraph. We'll go to connect object, and we can drag this underneath to connect our points. Now you can also make this editable, and then you'll have your object all connected. Now there's also another way. If I undo all the way back, so I just have our object selected but still not connected, what we can also do is select all, right click, and optimize. It does basically the same thing as connect object, except you don't have to, it saves you a few steps. So as you can see, when you select these are all connected. Next, what you can do is to give this a little bit of a ridge. So what I'm going to, with the roof, and in fact, let's rename this. We'll just name this roof. And we'll go to polygon mode, select our polygon, and then I on your keyboard is going to bring up inner extrude. We're just going to increase, we're going to shrink that down a little bit, and D on your keyboard is going to give us an extrude. Oops, excuse me. You can command click and drag your axis, and that'll give you an extrude inner, and that will give us a little bit of a ridge for our roof. And you can add in anything that you want into this roof. You can put in a little cube for a roof access if you want. Pull that off to the side, but we're going to keep this pretty simple. Okay, so now that we have our building, we have some options here in terms of materials. We have some options in the amount of extrusions that we can put into our cloner. We can remove them, we can add more, we can randomize like I showed you before. So we have some options in terms of how our building can look. We can also increase the size of our rectangle if we want to make it larger. And we can also, obviously, we can add in more count so we can make it taller, a taller building. So we have some flexibility in terms of what we can do with just this simple setup. We can build a pretty interesting city. So in the next lesson, I'm going to start bringing in just a basic street map design, a city map design, and we can start going ahead and building the rest of the city. See you there. In this lesson, I'm going to be making splines to give our city some city blocks and give it some boundaries. So first, what I want to do is I'm going to bring in a cube just as a size reference. And then I want to go to the top view, F2 on your keyboard. And what we're going to start doing is going to splines. Now, what I like to do is, and this is completely subjective, I like to bring in a freehand draw tool so I can make the borders of our city. Now, you can absolutely make this any shape you want. Using something pretty basic, but you can do any type of shape that you want. Make it something a little bit more interesting, and you can just draw out your freehand and then just close spline to close up your border. And what you can do then is go into Bezier tool, and I can hide my cube for now. And basically what you want to do is you want to make sure you have your snap enabled, and then go to snap, work plane snap, and then grid point snap. So what I want to do is be able to have our points that we make with our Bezier tool to snap to the grid. And if you've ever used Illustrator before, you'll know that it's very similar, and you just have these handles which you can adjust, also called tangents. And it's very similar to when you're making a rectangle and giving it just some rounding like we did for the building. But the difference is that we have a lot more control, and what I can do is if you have your axis in view, you can adjust these points. Now sometimes these axis bands get in the way, so I usually just go to filter and then hide those. You know, I go back and forth in order to get the shape that I want. Now, what's nice about this is that you can, you know, make this any shape that you want. I'm actually going to name this border, and we can then start copying. I'm actually going to put this. I'm going to enable access manipulation, and I'm just going to bring this into the center. And what's nice about this is that what we can do is, you know, copy our little blocks, our city blocks. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. So T on your keyboard, and then E on your keyboard to, you know, move our little city block around. Command drag, and you can start quickly building city blocks for your little city here. And it really doesn't matter. This border, I'm going to add this to a new layer, and add to new layer. If you click on the layers tab, you can see that this border has a green color, and you can simply lock it here if it's, you know, getting in the way. It's just really just for your own visual, just to see where the borders of your city are. So if you go back to attributes and then click on one of your splines, we can then start filling in. And like I said, these don't have to be squares. I'm just making this quickly for this tutorial. But if I go back to the Bezier tool, I can make these, you know, any shape that you would like to make. I'm just going to make something kind of quick here. And the idea here is just to give you, is to use these tools in order to quickly make your city. I'm going to turn off access bands, or axis. They kind of keep getting in the way. And just kind of getting these into a shape that, you know, you want to work with. And you can use the rotate tool in order to rotate these points around a little bit. And it's really nice having the snap to grid, very similar to Illustrator, where you can just quickly make these shapes and make them a little bit more precise. And I think we can make this whole I think I can make this a little bit larger. I'm going to enable the access manipulation and just move this into the center, pretty close to the center, and just transform just a little bit larger. Okay, so now that we have our basic city set up, what I can do is, you can do the same thing that we used for the building. So if I unlock our border, this could be just the streets of our city. So I'm going to go to our perspective mode, and I want to bring in extrude again. Now we have the basis of our city streets. Just like before, we want to go in the Y for the extrusion. And I can drag that down a bit. And the same thing goes for all our city blocks. Now, what I want to do is I want to start naming these and just kind of clean this up a little bit. So how you name them, and to me it just makes sense to go in left to right, line to line fashion. So I'm just going to name this block 1, block 2, and so forth. So just bear with me 1 second as I select these and just kind of clean these up. And it will help if I name and spell these correctly. So block 2, block 3, block 4, block 6, seven, and block 8. Okay, now that I have all these named and organized, now what I can do is I can bring in our buildings. But first, let's put the extrusion on these blocks. What you can do is bring in Extrude, and we're going to duplicate these. So I want to get this right. We'll go 0. And in terms of height, it doesn't have to be too large. But I'll just name this 5. I'll just put in 5 for terms of height. And caps, again, we'll go fillet cap for both start and end. 5, 1, 5 in steps, and 1 in radius. We'll also go constrain, and that'll keep it from expanding outward. So I'll have 8 blocks, so I just need to make 7 duplicates, and then simply add our our splines into child of our extrudes. Okay, now that we have all those set up, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to Option G to put these in a null, and I'll just name these blocks. And we have our border, and we can get rid of our cube. So F1 on our keyboard, you can see our small little city with our little blocks. And now what I want to do is I want to bring in our building. So we do that by go to File, Merge Objects, and we'll go to our building. So I'll just go to, I'll bring that in. Obviously, we have a pretty large building, and it brought our reference cube, so I can just delete that as well. We'll grab this and we'll name this just as before. We'll Option G, make it a null. And we'll just name this building 1. T on our T on our keyboard to transform, and we'll bring that a little bit smaller. And we will bring this to, if you go to front view, F4, zoom in a little bit, we can bring this right to the edge. And F2 on our keyboard, and we're going to bring this all the way over to block 1. F1. And now we have the basics of our little city. So in the next lesson, I'm going to be showing you, in between lessons, I'm going to fill in the blocks with our city buildings. and I'll show you some materials, and then from there what we're going to do is we're going to build a little street transit system. So we'll have some splines. We'll add in a few shapes in order to give it the sense that there's motion on our little grid, and then we'll wrap it up with some animation. Okay, as you can see, I put in the rest of the buildings. Excuse me. And what I can do now is do some variations with the size and shape of our building, so it gives it a little bit more variety. Before I do that, you'll notice, I mean, we have a lot of clones here, so it's going to start probably bogging down your viewport a little bit. So before we do anything, let's right click on the group that I made, and you'll notice how I set this up, block 1, block 2, and so forth, and then put the buildings within these blocks. So right click, Cinema 4D display tags, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use lines for the shading mode, and for style I'm just going to choose box. I'm going to command drag and place these on each of the blocks in our city, and this way it will make your viewport move a little bit smoother. So I'm going to start, I'm not going to go through all of these, I just want to show you real quickly what variations you can do within the cloner object. Maybe make some resizes, and then from there we're going to go into putting in some materials, and then in the next lesson what we'll do is we'll put in some animation for the streets. So now that we have our tags on, I'm just going to uncheck this one since this is the one we're working on. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm just going to quickly just do a few different things. Number one, say we're in this building. I want to show you a few things that we can do to give it some variety. And of course, this is again just for just showing you how to do these. You can make the shapes in your extrusion. You can make them any shape that you want. You can give it some more variety. You can add more points, make them longer, wider. But just for this example purpose, I just want to show you some little simple things. Well, first thing, what we can do is we can make it taller. And we can drag that up. And we're going to have to fill in the count, so we can just bring this up a little bit. The next thing, and obviously we're going to have to bring this roof all the way to the top point again. So we can make it taller, and I'm going to go to a different block. I'll just go to different ones. Maybe I'll try one in the front. And I just want to go through a few different ideas. Well, one that we can do is pretty simple. We can just make it smaller and shrink the whole building down. And if I pan around to see where we are and just kind of make it a little bit smaller, and then just drop it down to the bottom. But what we can also do is we can also change the shape. So if I go to large, and make sure I'm on, okay, let's try the fourth building. And if I go to height, I can shrink this down. So I don't know, 50, say. I'm going to do the same thing here, 50. And for our small rectangle, we can go, say, 40. I think that would work. Now we're going to have to change the roof. So I'm going to go to top view, F2 on your keyboard. And with the T key, I'm going to just shrink it in this access band. Now, we are going to get some distortion here. So just keep that in mind when you shrink these down a little bit. And distortion, what I mean is it's going to kind of stretch this a little bit. But I think for this purpose, I think it looks okay. So that's one thing we can do. Let's go to another block, and I want to show you something. Let's try this one right in front, and I'm gonna uncheck our display. So let's say this one this one building in the front, we can also use blend mode. So if we're in linear and we have clones, we can choose blend, and that's going to blend from our small or whatever object we have right underneath the cloner object, and it goes forward in this list. We can delete this one, and we can make the larger one on top, and you can see how we build into a pyramid style. And if I make this smaller, we can have sort of a pyramid style building. And let me resize this roof. And again, I'll go to F2 on our keyboard in order to view it from top view. And just shrink this down. So there's a few different things you can do. Obviously, there's a wide variety of different things that we can try in order to give some variety to our city. But that's just as a beginner and some of the different variations we can try. I want to make a material. So if you double click on your materials palette and double click on our material, I'm just going to quickly make some materials. I'm going to try black, but I don't like to use exact full black. I like to give it a little bit of color, even if it's very slightly. I like giving some real world examples of color, and it just seems more natural. And this is where we'll put this is, and let's go to one of the buildings. And I have this one in front, so let's put this on our large extrude there, and I'm gonna command click and drag and put that on our other large extrude. I'm going to command drag in our materials palette, and I'm gonna name this, you can name it blue, luminance, whatever, and I'll name this black. Whoops, black. And double click on the blue. I'm gonna turn off color, and I'm gonna turn on, oh, I did forget reflection. One quick second, let me go back. Sorry about that. I do want to put on a reflection. So it's not going to be a lot. I just want to give it just a little bit of glossiness to it. Okay, so command click. Sorry to make you do that. I'm going to turn off color, and I'm going to turn on luminance. And I'm going to go to a blue. It could be whatever you want. I was thinking more of like a bluish, teal color. And this is going to be a night scene, the way that I envisioned it, and have these blue bright spots. And I'm going to apply that to our small extrude. So, and let's also not forget the roof. So we'll put that on the roof as well. So what I'm going to do is, in between lessons, I'm going to apply the texture and maybe put in some more variety into our buildings. And I'm also going to put this texture on the streets and the blocks. So I'm going to do that, and in the next lesson, I'm going to do a little bit of an animation for the street grid, and we'll put in another material there, a little color there. We'll wrap it up with some animation and some lighting. So I'll see you then. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how I did the variations in the buildings. I'm going to put in a little bit of a light grid, and we'll do some lighting and animation as well. So real quick, what I want to do is select these display tags and uncheck them so you can see what I did here. And I basically made another pyramid style building here. Made a long one in the background and just did some variations, making it a little smaller, a little larger, and just to give some variety. Obviously, you can do lots of different variations on your own, as well as bringing in different shapes. I put a texture to this border that we have, but I think what's better is if we just have a floor. We'll hide the border and we'll just apply our material to the floor, and when you render, you can see how the floor is completely seamless, and you can see the little bit of a reflection, which I think is pretty cool. So next, what I want to do is I want to add in a little grid. I'm going to hide these buildings in our display tag. Go to F2 on your keyboard, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Splines, and I'm going to use the Bezier spline. And I'm just going to make a few lines that go throughout our little city. It doesn't have to be special. This is just example purposes, but you can obviously make them any way you want. I want to make this curve a little bit better. Okay. And let's see. I think I can even have this turn all the way out here. Okay, so next I want to make another spline. And you can do as many as you like. Oops, I think I'm in freehand. Yep, Bezier. So I'm just gonna come up here, put in another one. Crisscross our lines a little bit. And we'll have a object that will travel along our splines. So let's make another one. And maybe I'll start up here. Oh, did it again. Bezier. Maybe I'll have it travel down there. Crisscross and go out the other side. Maybe not the best composition, but I think this will work just fine. I'm just going to name these 1 and 2 and 3. I'm going to bring in a deformer, I'm going to use a spline wrap, and I used this before in another tutorial. What I can do is bring in a cylinder, and I'll give it a cap, filled cap, and radius, I guess this is fine. Object height, I guess 100 might be best, and we'll go maybe 2 in radius. That might be a little big, but we can adjust that. Next, I'm going to put the spline wrap as a child of the cylinder. And we'll make sure mode is keep length. And we'll put the spline in the spline field. Make sure that's 1. In fact, let me put in a null, and I'll just make this spline 1, just to keep things organized here. And let me go into perspective mode, and I want to move over here to the start of our first spline. And let's make sure our cylinder is plus, is it Z? X. There we go. Go back to your spline wrap, and we can make some adjustments to make this tail a little bit smaller. And this part is really just kind of making adjustments here to your spline, not the spline, but the shape of your spline wrap. And now I can make a material. I'm going to command drag, and I'll make this sort of a pinkish red, not exactly red. And I'm just going to pop this right on our cylinder so it stands out. And now let's go to spline wrap. You can see in our offset we can use, now notice here I didn't put enough segments in, so we have this weird movement with our shape that we made for the cylinder. So what I can do is go to cylinder and go to height segments, and we're just going to bump this up all the way until we have a nice smooth transition around the corners. So spline wrap, and we'll animate using our, that does look pretty cool. We'll animate using this offset. So let's first make sure we have everything set up for our other splines, and then we'll put in some lighting. Let's go to null, and I'm going to make spline 2, and you can name this whatever, light 2, light grid 2, whatever. And spline 3. I'm going to drop this into here so we can have a little bit organized. And you can maybe make different shapes, but I think what will be best is I'm just going to copy these. So I'm going to command drag and put this underneath our spline 2, and command drag and put it in spline 3. We already have our materials and the size and shape and everything for our cylinder. But what you do need to have to do is select your spline wrap and make sure you change the fields of your spline here in the spline wrap. So make sure you grab 2, then 2, and we're in spline 3, and drag this into the spline field. So now you're going to have these various objects moving around our little city. And we'll just simply animate, make sure we're in the first keyframe. We're in spline 1. Command click this button on the offset, and we'll go all the way to the end, or just click this command right here, and we'll go to all the way to the end, and then Command click to set that keyframe. Now we can do the same thing to the other ones. Make sure we're at the first keyframe, Command click, go to the last keyframe, drag this to 100, and Command click, set those keyframes, and we'll do the same thing to our last one. First keyframe, Command click, last keyframe, and 100% in the offset. Command click and to set that keyframe. So we have our objects moving around. Now we can also adjust. Okay, so say I'm in the second spline wrap. I can adjust these keyframes by just pulling them closer to each other, so we have a shorter distance to travel. Just to give it some slight variation, I'm going to do the same thing to our third one. Maybe this one is even quicker. And I'm going to go to the first keyframe, push play. In fact, it's almost a little too slow for my liking. So what I want to do is maybe for the first one, I'm going to drag this one all the way to the front. Let's see how that... See, I like how fast that is. So what I'm going to do is get these a little bit closer to each other, because I kind of like how fast that goes. And this guy, maybe it's going to be really fast. So let's make this. So, I mean, you can adjust this as much as you want. I think maybe I want this a little bit closer. And that one kind of goes a little bit too late. So, I mean, you can definitely spend time and adjust each one. You can add in way more. You can add in maybe double the amount to give you the look that you're looking for. Okay, so now that we have our little animation, let's put in some lighting. I'm gonna go to light, and I'm gonna bring in an area light. I'm going to rotate this about 90 degrees. Oops, 90. And let me zoom out, and I'm going to make this a lot larger and bring this all the way up. Whoop, wrong direction. And bring this all the way up. And what I want to do now is change the color. I want to go to kind of have this teal color going on. So I just want to maybe give it that same kind of look. And I think the intensity is okay. But maybe bring that down to about 65%. And here's another thing that I wanted to try. I was experimenting with this before, and I kind of liked how it looked, but it will jack up your render time. But I do want to show you this one thing that I was working on. So if you go to sphere, I'm going to resize this till it's pretty small. Let me zoom in so I can show you. And what I was thinking is almost have it sort of a street light. I'm going to go hemisphere, And if you pull this up, you can see that it's only just a half a circle or a half a sphere. And I'm going to put actually, I'm going to duplicate the sphere, bring it down a tad, rotate it 90 degrees, or 180 degrees, excuse me, and just kind of pull this up. Right now I have snapping on, and I want to turn that off because I just want to have it slightly, let me zoom in, resize, and just have it slightly underneath our first hemisphere. I'm going to put in this material here, and I'm going to put the black one on top. I'm going to drop in a light, move this up here, and I am going to make that light also a teal color. Something like this, maybe. Now, what I want to do is go to, I want to go to fall off. So go to your details tab, fall off, and we're going to go inverse square physically accurate. And I want to adjust our fall off until this is kind of a judgment, but I think kind of small, not too much there. And I'm going to zoom out, and let's give it a render just to see how this looks. So you kind of, some of these light streaks are a little hidden, and actually this has to be moved over into the block, but you can kind of see where I'm going here. You can have these light lampposts all throughout your scene, and the way that I did that was, first I want to grab everything and I want to group it, Option G, and make this lamp. And then what I want to do next is I want to go to the cloner and drop our lamp in the cloner, but we'll use grid. We'll drop down the Z to 1 because that's all we need. And in terms of size, that's really has to do more with your own, whoops, not that one. It really has to do with the size of your city. So this requires a bit of experimentation and a little bit of R&D to get it where you want your lamppost to be. If you have a very grid-like city structure, then this will work. If it's very chaotic kind of city plan, then this is going to be a little bit tricky. But for this purposes, I think this will work out okay. And I just want to drag this up because the cloner dropped down the lamps a little bit. And at this point, I'm probably not going to get each one on the corner. If I experiment a little bit, I could probably get it. But the idea here is, let me get like a top view, and I'll do a render. And you can see, this might be not the best angle. Let me try again. So you can see how we can kind of get this grid, this light thing that we have going on. You have the animation, and once you render it, you can have your own camera views, and it gives it a really cool techie kind of look. Obviously, I did this very quickly, and I was making very simple buildings. You can make every building differently right from the get-go when you do your splines. If you go back to your original rectangle that we did, they only have to be rectangles. In fact, there was a few that I did in Illustrator, bought those in, had these different shapes, these different angular shapes. So you can really get pretty deep with this, experiment with the different building shapes. You can experiment obviously with the different materials and lighting that we use. So this is very flexible in terms of what you want to do. And of course, the city plan itself can be a lot different. So anyway, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more tutorials. Thanks. Bye.